Welcome to the Search Bar, where we're exploring why Google is becoming less interested in your website. So Google's mission has always been to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And that statement, which was established by the founders in 1998, has guided their efforts for many years, but it seems like it's becoming less the case these days. Recently, there's been a number of articles published about how Google is indexing fewer URLs, and that seems like it's the case. So why would Google care less about finding content and making it universally accessible these days? So Melissa's here with me today, and I thought I would throw that question out, Melissa. Do you think Google is actually indexing fewer pages than it used to? Is Google less interested in content? And if so, why would that be the case?
Yeah, let's start with the first question. So is Google indexing less content these days? I think so. I think it's in their benefit to not. I think the thing that changed a lot of that is the fact that they used to rely on a traditional way of crawling the web, and now you have LLMs. And so the LLMs, those large language model systems that power an AI, that really kind of changed what they already have an interest in, basically, on what they're looking at. Now, granted, an LLM will want as much content as it can get. So you would think, why are they then indexing less rather than more? But honestly, it's because there is so much duplicate content all around the web. And then also looking at how well people are really putting things together. So what's the actual quality of that content? That is something that Google has already been fighting year over year over year about with content creators, particularly those more website side, like website content creators, saying create good quality content, because they know that there's a lot of duplicate content out within the web. And some of the things that bots had before pre-LLMs, it really had a way in which Google could kind of create a way to manipulate the system rather than it being super authentic, because not until LLMs were introduced that you could really understand the full context of all of your text and your multimedia, so your images and your videos. Before then, it was really more about what was in there and certain keywords or certain structure or a certain approach to a schema or something like that. And so I think because of all of that, Google is now saying, we already know a lot of the stuff that, like a dentist website, there's going to be the same, a dentist website in, 50 different places are all going to say why, cleaning your teeth is good and how that affects your health and things like that. And so instead of just regurgitating and having all of that in there, they only needed one to get the answer. So I feel like once they introduced the LLM, it really became a sense of what do I really need and what is actual content that really solves something for a user. So I think that answers kind of both of those questions, the beginning and the second part.
I think another thing to keep in mind is that, Google seems like this just absolutely massive corporation with unlimited resources, but it's still a business, and they still have to appease their shareholders, every quarter, and they have to become more profitable. And every time Google sends out bots to crawl the web, to run through URLs and websites, that takes up resources. Mm-hmm. It takes money for them to do that. And so the less they crawl, the less they're extending their resources and the less ultimately they have to expend and pay. So it makes sense in a business sense in a lot of ways. They've been doing this for almost 3 decades. Yeah. They've crawled and indexed so much. I'm sure as a business now, they're thinking, we have a lot of content. Yeah. And why should we stretch ourselves to find all this content out there? Most of it's not very high quality. Most of it's not that great. And so much of it is duplicate or very similar to other content out there. Why don't we scale this thing back a little bit and not worry about all the world's information like we originally said?
Yeah, because essentially they're looking for what most companies are looking for right now, efficiencies. Mm-hmm. That's a really great way to find some efficiencies for sure.
Yeah. So, I think, in some ways it's disappointing. We want Google to index all, the pages on our websites and find all that information and things like that. But from a business sense, I can understand why they're doing it, even if maybe that's a little bit inconsistent with their mission statement that they have.
Well, I don't know if it's super inconsistent with their mission statement, because again, we've gotten to a point where there's so many things that are similar you would, at some point, you're going to have to draw the line, right? So where is that line going to be drawn? And I think, again, because of where technology has come to this point, and with they have Gemini, so their own LLM, that model then gives them a sense to say, hey, we can stop just trying to inundate and grab everything that's out there, and we can start to focus more a little bit on what makes most sense to deliver, again, a solution to a user. So content that actually does something in against somebody's journey. So I think that's where that makes more sense, that they draw their line there.
Yeah. And to get back to the duplicate content thing too, there's just so many websites out there. There's so much content out there today. And, your average website probably creates a lot of content that's not very useful. It doesn't have very many words. It's not very unique. And so as the web has grown over the last, 30 years, there is a lot more content out there than there used to be. And therefore, the odds that duplicate content would exist now is higher than it was 30 years ago. And there is so much content that is just very similar. So it puts the pressure, back on marketers, on content writers and things like that. If you are going to create a web page, whether it's a blog article or a service page or whatever that might be, you really, really have to work these days on making it very unique and useful. Maybe it even has some helpful calculators or functionality in there. Embedding videos to supplement the message throughout, having really dynamic and interesting content. Like, you have to really, really work hard if you want your content to rank.
Yeah, and I think that's where it comes back to where we're at now. Again, because of the LLMs, everything becomes more contextualized. It's less about writing content, I'm going to say, like the text format based, and more about understanding your audience and what they're really looking for. In some ways, before the LLMs, it was a little bit easier to do things like, to kind of game the system a little bit more of like, how many types of keywords that I have in here, how many semantical references that would, kind of relate to this, how many internal links, how many pieces of content that kind of get this hub and spoke model kind of going so I can have that out there. And so instead of focusing on the things, because the bots couldn't understand all the contextual basis then, it now has the ability to do that. So where it used to be certain words had a priority and had a way of showcasing topically and thematically what this was about, now every word on the page makes a difference in an LLM versus only certain things getting a little bit more of a weighted metric associated with it, if that makes sense.
It's gotten smarter.
And so because of that, again, it comes down to when you actually can contextualize everything, you can then determine that things very quickly may or may not have any benefit, or you have seen this before, and so move past that and go on to something else from an indexing perspective.
And another thing that you've brought up is that, while web pages and copying content, everything's extremely valuable, you still got to have that. There's been a shift in how content is consumed. 30 years ago versus now, it's infinitely different online.
Yeah.
I mean, it used to be only copy, and now it's so much more video, for instance.
Yeah, I think it gets back to saying knowing your audience and what they're really looking for. So if, when there's stats out there saying that people spend over, longer than 2.5 hours on TikTok daily, so that's, to put that in a reference point, that's longer than a theatrical movie usually.
Yeah.
And so if they're spending that much time consuming information, they're not just consuming entertainment. They're consuming information. They're searching within TikTok. They're doing things looking for, it might be more of an authentic voice or somebody that they trust more, but they're taking all of that in. That shows us that is a shift in consumer behavior. So why do you need content that's only text-based on a website? Because that's the way we always thought about it. So it's almost as if it's like, it used to be brochures, pre-internet days, right? Like everybody had a brochure to talk about, like, let's take a camp, right? Like a Hidden Acres summer camp, have a brochure. Now they have a website, but the website functioned like a brochure website. And then we kind of got a little bit more detail within there. And so you got a lot more navigation pieces. But now we've come to a point where it's like, okay, it still feels a little bit more like it's just a brochure or a book. It feels very physical as a website, where the social media platforms, get a little bit more of like the behavior that we've all shifted towards, which is where we want to consume video, we want to consume audio, which is why I think podcasts are also having a big impact right now, because we have also transitioned from wanting to listen to things so often, like YouTube videos and whatnot, that a lot of people will play the YouTube video while they're driving around. Even if they can't see the visual, they still want to hear what's going on. And so that's another shift in behavior. And websites just haven't caught up with either one of those two shifts. Like, you tend to get more of the text based on a website rather than these other things, which is why these social media platforms have also had a chance to win as much as they have, because most websites are not feeding their audience in a manner in which the audience actually wants to consume the information.
Yeah, it just goes to show, you can't, in the digital marketing world, you can never just rest on your laurels and do what you've done. You always have to be aware and ready to jump onto the next thing. Not every new thing, but you have to watch it really closely. And, if you're doing SEO and content the same way you were 10 years ago, 5 years ago, you might start to be losing. And you can't, like you said, think of websites the same way you did 10 years ago, because it's different and it changed and the whole game has changed. So diversifying your content is really important, depending on your audience and where your audience is. You got to meet them in the right place. But just doing one thing typically isn't a great strategy.
Yeah.
And you probably shouldn't do absolutely everything, every single platform, because you probably don't have the bandwidth, but diversifying beyond just one tactic is probably very important.
Yes. And knowing your audience and what they really want, they probably don't want your content on every single platform. So like, using myself as an example, like if I am shopping for something, it doesn't mean I want to see it on Pinterest and TikTok and Instagram and Substack
and LinkedIn.
Yeah, I don't want to see it everywhere, because I go to those different platforms for different reasons. So again, it's not just about reaching your audience. And I know most website owners will want all of their audience on all of those platforms to come back to their website ultimately. We can argue whether or not that's even the right thing to do anymore. I think it's more about turning it around and saying, as a brand, I need to meet my audience where they're at rather than expecting them to come back to where I am. So that's something that I think has to be a little bit of a shift. And I think we are primed for that with where AIs are going as well, by starting to introduce things like e-commerce within there, or, shoppable buttons within, or shoppable
like content within AI platforms.
Inside platforms,
Which we actually just did a video on. We'll put the link in the description. But we talked about how Shopify looks like it's coming to ChatGPT pretty soon.
Yeah.
Which would be really crazy.
And I think ultimately it just comes down to like ownable pieces for some of those platforms, like ownable commerce, right? So like if Shopify does really come out in ChatGPT, then that's an ownable place for them to get into a platform. And so it's going to be some of those places where that the platforms already have the audiences. You as a brand need to figure out how to meet them within those platforms rather than relying on them to always come back to your website. Now, I will say that also plays a really big shift in some business models for some organizations, where they do rely on users coming to their site, where like them visiting is advertising and revenue dollars for them. And so how do they exist in a world where one-stop shop of a place isn't maybe going to be the future? It means they got to become a platform. They have to be useful enough to their users that users would seek them out, rather than going to a platform. We'll just use, for instance, than going to a Substack and searching for that brand there, right? If they can become as powerful as, and here's an example of a company that did this, Amazon. Amazon used to rely on like how they would get all their messaging and out to other to their audiences until they became powerful enough that they became the platform. It used to just be a website, and now we think of Amazon as its own living, breathing platform.
Yeah.
Walmart's going in that direction as well, where people will go to Walmart to search out specific things. So for the brands that feel like there's no way I would ever be able to become a platform, I think you're just not thinking big enough.
Yeah.
Because it can be scary to think that big.
It is, because you're like, oh, I'm not an Amazon, I'm not a Walmart. How could I ever become a platform? But your website is the one platform that you fully own. Think about TikTok and the trouble it has gone through, and there's still some uncertainty. Is TikTok even going to survive and be around? You never know what platform can be taken away. and
never know which one's going to crop up,
which one's going to jump up and everything. Yes. So if the only thing you ever did was YouTube, and you put all your eggs in the YouTube basket, that can be a great solution for you if it connects well with your audience and if you're doing a really good job at it, until YouTube suddenly starts censoring all these videos and then you can't get your content out there.
Or the DOJ decides to break up YouTube in a certain way from Google, and then it doesn't work the way that it used to.
Or another platform springs up. So you should never put all your eggs in one basket. But your website is something that, it is your platform. And so at least it's not just going to go away like a TikTok could potentially go away. So it is worth investing in and putting the time and energy to get people there. But it is an investment, and it does take time and money and effort, but you do it well and it's worth it.
Yeah.
Well, we hope that was really helpful for you. Very interesting conversation. Hey, if either of us can ever be a speaker at one of your events, maybe it's a marketing session you have or a panel or anything like that, reach out to us. We love to do that sort of thing. Thanks so much for tuning in. Subscribe. We'll talk to you next time.